right, so I just wanted to, today we don't have a lot from the legal side anyway, so because I just wanted to update everybody with what is going on with the ETS and sort of things that you want to be thinking about. Another interesting thing that happened, doesn't affect most of our members, but the healthcare mandate was blocked in 10 states for some employees. Not, I think the closest state to us is New Hampshire, but it is something to think about if you're in the healthcare space to make sure that you are where you want to be with that. So just a kind of a heads up. But I think the ETS is the one that really affects much more of our membership base. As you know, the ETS is OSHA's emergency temporary standard that is intended to apply to employers with 100 or more employees. So, you know, right after the ETS came out, multiple legal challenges were filed in circuit courts of appeals. And apparently there is a quirk with OSHA that you don't have to go to the district court first. You can go straight to the circuit courts of appeals. There's a lottery system. So it's not just a race to the courthouse. There's a lottery system where the cases were consolidated and assigned to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is a pretty conservative leaning court of appeals. So the anticipation is that they will lean more in favor of not enforcing the mandate, but you know, who knows? But even though you have the lottery that assigns the case to the Circuit Court of Appeals, any court can rule to halt the ETS before it actually goes into effect. And that's what happened. As you remember, back on November 12th, the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit issued an order staying enforcement of implementation of the ETS. And now the Sixth Circuit has it to determine where do we go with the Fifth Circuit, with the Fifth Circuit's order. This ultimately could end up in the Supreme Court. The Sixth Circuit briefing schedule tells us that we're not likely to hear anything on this until at least December 10th at the earliest. And that, of course, is after the first deadline of the ETS. The first deadline of the ETS, as you will remember, is December 6th. And that was the deadline for employers to develop their vaccine policy, to determine employee vaccination status, and to provide leave for workers to get vaccinated or to recover from side effects from the vaccination. So that, you know, really kind of is on hold at the moment. Even if the administration convinces the Sixth Circuit, you know, that we don't need to, that the ETS should be in effect, OSHA is going to be forced to push back their deadlines. And an ETS by definition can only be in place for 6 months anyway. So this gets, you know, you can kind of see what's happening. The time frame on everything is narrowing a little bit. So, you know, it's very much a stay tuned. You wonder how, if at all, the Omicron variant plays into any of this. Hard to say. I don't even think the medical experts really know what this variant means for COVID, whether it's, I think they think it's more easily transmissible. It's not clear, I think, at this point, if it causes more symptoms, if it's more deadly, if it's more likely to cause hospitalization. I don't think it's clear at this point whether it is susceptible to the vaccine or not. So that, who knows, that could play into things as well. But I'm sure as an employer, your concern is, well, what do we do now? So ETS has a statement up on their website. After all the legal challenges were filed, they said enforcement activity around the ETS would be effectively paused amid the proceedings. And that's the quote right there directly from the website. So even though they remain confident in their authority to pass the ETS, they're going to suspend activities related to implementation enforcement pending, you know, whatever might happen in the litigation. So I think that, you know, I've gotten a lot of questions over the last week or two from employers. Well, what do we do now? You know, on the one hand, this thing is suspended, but on the other hand, it could come back and we don't really know. Should we prepare to prepare? And I think the prudent answer to that is yes. Obviously, you want to be communicating with your employees. You know, I'm sure they're hearing stuff about this in the news, but I don't know how closely they're paying attention to it. You know, the average person is not spending a lot of time worrying about what the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals is doing. So it probably would be helpful to get some communication out if you haven't already that, hey, you know, in the simplest of terms, this is what's going on, but we're ready, you know, as an employer, if this ETS goes into effect to do what we need to do to be compliant with the law. So the first thing you really want to do is see if you're covered, right? It's a 100 employee threshold. It includes fully remote workers. It includes employees at every site you have. It includes part-time employees, does not include independent contractors. If you have 2 or more related entities, they may very well be combined for these purposes. So the test that the ETS states is if the entities basically are integrated with regard to safety. You know, a lot of employers haven't dealt with safety issues in a very significant way. If you're a blue collar workforce, this is, you don't spend a lot of time paying attention to OSHA, not like you would if you were a manufacturer or construction. So you might want to look at standards under other employment laws such as FMLA, and it's going to be very case by case. So if you do have two related entities and you're curious as to whether or not they could be, you have one entity with 60 employees, one entity with 45 employees, and you're saying, would these be combined to be a single entity? You can reach out to us. For members, reach out to us on hotline, and we're happy to give you an idea, based on what the standards might be. So you can make that judgment for yourself. And remember that even if you are covered by the ETS, it might not apply to all of your employees. Doesn't apply to employees who don't report to a workplace where other individuals are present. So working from home, certainly, or employees who work exclusively outdoors, and that's really exclusively outdoors, like all the time. But think about that too with regard to the ETS. If you are in a moment right now as an employer where you're thinking about bringing everybody back to the office in January, you might want to put those plans on hold just to see how this ETS plays out, because you wouldn't have to, if you had somebody exclusively working from home who never actually came to the office, they wouldn't have to vaccinate or test under the ETS if they're still working exclusively from home. So something to think about from a planning point of view. The other thing that we were supposed to be doing as employers under the ETS by this December 6th deadline was figuring out who's vaccinated. You guys have heard me talk about this for months and months and months. I think it's a really good idea to figure out who's vaccinated anyway. Remember that, and the right way to do it in my mind is getting a copy of the vaccine cards. Remember that those are considered medical records, so you'd want to keep them in a separate medical file. We've had a lot of inquiries of, well, what about, if we have an HRIS system, could we keep them electronically? And I think you just need to really figure out how privately can you keep the information in your HRIS. Is there a place that things can be kept where only HR can have access to it? Is it password protected, for example? So things like that to think about, the standards. But I would think very seriously, even if the ETS never goes into place, I would think very seriously about gathering proof of vaccination. I just think as an employer, it puts you in a much better position to know who's vaccinated, who's not, what are you really dealing with. Another thing that I think that all employers should be thinking about, I think the goal here is to have as many people vaccinated as possible. So even if the ETS doesn't go into place, what can you do to help support vaccination? Can you give employees paid time off to go get vaccinated? Can you give employees extra PTO to recover from vaccine side effects? It certainly is something to consider, even if the ETS never goes into place. And then obviously, the big thing under the ETS would be you figure out who's vaccinated, you figure out who's not. Those who are not vaccinated are wearing masks in the workplace. Those who are not vaccinated are getting tested on a regular basis. This is the piece that you can hold off on, but it's sort of prepare to implement if you need to. You might want to think about drafting some policies that you may or may not ultimately have to put into place. You may want to think about how would we do testing if we needed to do testing. I know a lot of employers have been looking into the over-the-counter tests or have been looking into to contracting with different test providers. It's, again, prepare to prepare. I think this is not going to go into effect most likely in December, but it certainly is something to be thinking about for the future. And always keep in mind, you as the employer can do more than the government requires you to do. So you might have made a decision in all of this that I don't really care if the ETS goes through or not. We're going to go ahead and mandate vaccines. You can still do that. Keep that in mind. And these were the important dates. The January 4th date was figuring out who's vaccinated and testing regularly for those who are not. And the other date was December 6th for everything else. Like I said, that December 6th date really goes out the window. So let's, again, it's pretty much a wait and see, but I think there are a few things you can be doing now. The big one is figure out if you would be affected by the ETS. The other one is communicate with your employees so they have some sense as to what's going on. And I really think you should be, regardless of the ETS, you should be figuring out who's vaccinated by collecting cards. And you should really be considering making vaccination as easy as possible by giving people paid time off to get vaccinated and to recover from vaccine side effects. So that's really all I have for the week, unless we have any questions.
A couple of questions, and thanks, Amy. That was really helpful and clear. So I think with the stay by the courts, I think a couple questions came in. So in terms of the ETS, if it were permitted to go through, that 6-month period is really a prelude to a final rule. I mean, the point of the
Right.
6 months is it's not, hey, it's done. It gives them time for the full public comment period and the like to come up with a permanent regulation. So, which we won't know what that'll say at this point.
Right, and it could change based on the public
Right.
comment period. Yep.
Now, the second question in terms of that preparation, folks are asking the question of, if again, depending on what the courts do, I would suspect there's still going to be some period of time for people to get ready. It won't be an immediate tomorrow you have to start doing this. Is that your thought as well?
That's what you would think. It would seem unreasonable otherwise for employers to have to jump in immediately.
Yeah. A good question was asked was, now that all adults can receive the booster, your thoughts about extending time off or sick time to getting the booster. And again, it's not a mandatory requirement, but what are your thoughts, or what are you hearing people doing with respect to the booster?
I have not heard from any members around this, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea, especially as we go into the winter months. And the theory has always been that COVID is going to be worse during the winter, especially in the cold weather states where we're huddled inside. I think there's just a basic safety issue, which is if the more people you have fully vaccinated, the more people you have with boosters in your workforce, the less likely you are to have people get sick, the less likely you are to lose productivity. So I would say if you can do it, if you can afford to do it, yeah, let's encourage people to get boosters. Let's encourage people to have some paid time off for that, and also paid time off to recover. And OSHA did give us a little signal around the time to recover. They said 2 days is a reasonable amount of time.
Was that for the booster as well, or the vaccine?
It didn't say for the booster, it said for the vaccine, but it sounds very, one of the big questions we got around FFCRA was what amount of time is a reasonable amount of time to recover from the vaccines? And now OSHA said two days is reasonable.
Gotcha. Someone asked a question for members. Do we have a sample policy on COVID vaccination to comply with the ETS?
Yes, actually OSHA has some model policies, and I believe we have those up in the Coronavirus Resource Center.
Okay, so if you remember, if you can't locate that, just give a call.
Just let us know. Yep.
Someone asked a question, any news on if the booster become a requirement? I have not seen anything on that front at this point.
No, CDC's definition of fully vaccinated is still just, the single J&J shot or 2 shots of Moderna and Pfizer. That could change, but as of right now, that's the definition of fully vaccinated.
Someone asked a question about still no opinion on who pays for testing. I think you've covered this before in terms of what the state laws, any change in kind of your thoughts on that?
There are state laws that say, state laws, I think in about 20 or 5-ish states that say that the employer should pay for the testing if the employer was requiring the testing. I've gotten pushback from members which says, well, we're not requiring the testing, the government is requiring the testing. So there's definitely, this is going to be challenged. Let's assume the ETS goes into place. If there are employers who make their employees pay for testing in some of these states that have laws, there will be legal challenges, and we'll kind of see what happens. The other more practical question, though, is if you as the employer are going to force your employees to pay for testing, and the testing can be quite expensive, my guess is those employees are not going to stick around.
Okay. Someone threw in the chat about holiday parties that people are changing or continuing based on the recent spikes as well as Omicron. If you guys want to, anybody that has a thought on it, if you want to chat it in for each other, that would be great. Let's see, we have 2 more questions. Someone asked, are we recommending non-vaccinated employees wear masks? We have 54 employees and a small number not vaccinated. So it's, again, I think the ETS required it, but it's not currently required.
So that was what the ETS was going to require. Remember that CDC recommends masks for everybody indoors if you're an area in high transmission, and those of us in the greater Philadelphia area are all in areas of high transmission. So we still have plenty of members where everybody's wearing a mask inside.
Okay. And then finally, someone said, should we still collect vaccination cards for those employees who work remotely at all times due to working in another state?
If they are never going to go into an office, if they are never going to go to a customer site, if they are never going to travel on business for you, and the ETS never goes into effect, then yeah, you don't have to. I don't think it really is necessary to collect them. But I think the ETS is going to say that, yeah, you have to collect those, assuming that it goes into effect.
Gotcha. Okay, Amy, I think that's it. Thank you very much. And as always, each week there's a slight new variation to talk about. So Amy's keeps busy tracking everything, and I'm sure we'll know more about Omicron next week. But thanks very much.